So, welcome to my last session, my second session. So, this has been a real treat. I truly appreciate the folks letting me kind of do back to back sessions on a couple of different topics, kind of with the same focus on making developer lives better, easier, more productive. And this is just a different approach or a different angle of doing that. But it's something that's been bugging me for a long time. And I'm finally kind of put things together to do this. I pulled in some material that I have worked on in different ways, but I kind of reimagined it. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart as well, from way back. So welcome to this session on Dude, What Happened to My Developer First Cloud, or Production Easy Spring Cloud, if you will. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal cloud advocate of Java and JVM languages at Microsoft. For a little bit of background, I did come from the Spring team. I was at Pivotal and then VMware. Came over to work with Azure Spring Apps and keep working with Spring at Microsoft, and that'll be important as we go into that later. But if you do have any questions, comments, or feedback at the end, we should hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A, although I'm going to try to I'll definitely try to leave time for that. It's just always tough because there's always a million things I want to talk about because I only talk about stuff I enjoy. Which I guess is the hazard of doing that. But if you think of things and you don't have time to ask them at the end, or you think of them after the fact, please do reach out to me on email or at Twitter/X. That's probably the best way to reach me, is on X now until the name changes again. But if you have questions, comments, or feedback you don't want to share with the whole world on Twitter/X, my DMs are open. So follow me and shoot me a DM, and I'll respond, answer, and we'll go from there. All good. A bit about me, for those of you who weren't in my earlier talk: I am an architect and developer by background. I am an advocate, and advocacy combines the two things that I love to do most, which are code and talk. I love a good conversation, and I love good, elegant code. Hopefully someday I'll be able to write some. In the meantime, I just write code. Anyway, I am a Java champion, a Java 1 rockstar, a Groundbreaker ambassador, Kotlin developer expert, and a licensed instrument-rated pilot. I leaned on the piloting part of it in the previous talk of Copilot is my Copilot, but we're not going to talk about that so much now. It's just a fun thing I do. So my latest book is Spring Boot Up and Running. This was released last year. I'm going to be releasing an updated repo with Spring Boot 3 stuff. I don't want to change the repo because I want people, whenever they get this book from the library or Safari Books Online or bookstore, to be able to use the examples as they are. But I do want to release a parallel repo, and I'm working on that now. So follow the book on Twitter/X and for updates. If you want a free preview of this and any other O'Reilly property, you can go to the top link, the bit.ly Spring Boot book, and get a 7 or 10 day trial of Safari Books Online and check it all out if you want. It's up to you. It's all good. So the plan for this session is this. I love a good quote. I collect great quotes from witty people. Again, hopefully someday I'll be one. But Leonard Bernstein was the former conductor of the New York Philharmonic Orchestra and a former composer. And he once said, to achieve great things, two things are needed: a plan and not quite enough time. This is my favorite Bernstein quote. And one of my favorite quotes of all time. I think we have both of those, a plan and not quite enough time. So we'll see where we go with it. Now, every talk, every great sharing of information, every great application revolves around a domain. And most of these domains are pretty pedestrian, let's be real. But sometimes you get a domain that really, really grabs you. This is world-changing stuff, things that we need to apply the best minds of our generation to solving. And that's exactly what we have here with this domain that we're going to be talking about today. What is a sandwich? Forget everything else. I mean, all the other stuff it pales in comparison to this. This is a mind bender, right? What is a sandwich? And where did this start? Well, the age-old question of, is a hot dog a sandwich? And when you start considering a hot dog, and is it really a sandwich, and does it qualify, then this gets to be a pretty slippery slope, as you'll soon learn. This is something that just really ties you up. Now, you're probably wondering where this came from. What inspired this? Well, I don't know if anybody's seen the Silicon Valley series. I know people have seen the Silicon Valley series. I don't know if you particularly, fellow developer, have seen the Silicon Valley series. If you haven't, you should watch this. But there was a great app created called Seafood. And seafood identified things, whether it was a hot dog, and the idea was, of course, it would identify various different foods, but what it wound up doing is identifying if it was a hot dog or not a hot dog. So it was somewhat limited in terms of its recognition. A little bit more information. Seafood was a pitch made up in the conference room by Ehrlich. It was supposed to be Shazam for food. Remember those quaint times just a single digit number of years ago when everything was the Uber for X, or the, well, X, can't say that now, Uber for something, or the Shazam for something, or whatever. This was the Shazam for food. But the development stopped after the algorithm could only detect hot dogs. Now, interestingly, again, harkening back just a few years, seafood was bought by Periscope for $30 million. So, not bad. Good times, I guess. Anyway, why is this important? Well, dear fellow developer, the short answer is the why doesn't matter, right? The longer answer is the subject matter experts specify the non-functional requirements, not us, right? So we get to weigh in on things, and of course, as we develop more expertise in a particular domain, we can contribute mightily to the better definition and the better creation of applications that solve certain needs. But ultimately, the sign-off is done by the end users, the community, our customers, because they'll determine why something is important or not. So we're along for the ride, at least in that regard. So how do we solve this, right? What is a sandwich? What makes a sandwich? Is a particular thing that we consider a sandwich? And this is where the cube rule of food identification comes into being. This is very important, and it's critical to the development of our application here today. Now, I'm going to exit that so that then I can go and pull the cube rule up. Let's see. There it is. Okay. So the cube rule of identification, again, as seen in the Webby Awards, Washington Post, Maryland courts, this is important stuff. Now, I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of this. How did we get here? How did they get here? Well, first, they asked, are hot dog sandwiches? Sounds familiar, right? We have classic sandwiches, grilled cheese, a Reuben, a peanut butter and jelly. The hot dog is left wondering, am I even a sandwich? Well, according to the New York Department of Taxation and Finance, and of course, the tax people always get involved in definitions of, well, everything, right? According to them, this bulletin explains what's considered a sandwich for sales tax purposes. And according to them as well, hot dogs and sausages on buns, rolls, etc., are indeed sandwiches. Is that good enough? Probably not. Because then folks get into things and they say, well, okay, let's talk about Pop-Tarts. Pop-Tarts are kind of ravioli then. To which Pop-Tarts then came back and said, excuse me, you've got it backward. Ravioli are a kind of Pop-Tart. I don't know. This is starting to get really messy, right? The sandwich alignment chart came along, trying to bring order to the chaos, which was a good first effort, I think, because you had the scale of ingredients from purist to neutral to rebel, and then structure from purist to neutral to rebel. So a hardline traditionalist says, in terms of ingredients, you should have the classic sandwich toppings, the meat, the cheese, the lettuce, the condiments, etc. The structure, you should have 2 pieces of bread or a baked product with toppings in between. So the hardline traditionalists say, well, a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich is it's a sandwich, right? If you go down to ingredient rebels, I mean, we have ice cream with chocolate chips, and you still have the 2 starches here, the 2 bread/baked products, but what are you putting in the middle? You take it the other way, the structure rebel, but the ingredient purists, they have all the normal sandwich ingredients, but now they've got it in a wrap, a soft flour tortilla, which is a little different, but okay, that still, under these rules, classifies as a sandwich. Then you have radical anarchists who just say, well, look, everything's a sandwich. A Pop-Tart's a sandwich. Wow. Yeah, as you might imagine, chaos ensued. And then they're saying, well, look, use the cube rule. What is the cube rule? It's a grand unified theory of food identification. And it's basically, it centers around identifying dishes based on the starch locations, which is kind of genius, right? If you have 1 starch, it's toast. If you have 2, it's a sandwich. 3 makes it a taco. You got a U-shaped starch, 3 sides, that's a taco. 4 is sushi. 5 is a soup or a salad with bread bowl. 6 is a calzone. And then we take it from there. Some examples, for instance, of toast. Well, pizza is a kind of toast. Nigiri sushi is a kind of toast. And a pumpkin pie slice is toast. It's just bent toast, right? That makes sense. You've got a topping on top of a starch. And then if you look at a sandwich, some popular examples are a quesadilla, non-folded. If you fold it, then it's 3 sides. That's out of the question here. So we've got a non-folded quesadilla. We have toast. We have a Victoria sponge cake, which is also a sandwich. Regarding tacos, a hot dog is a taco, right? Because three sides, it makes sense. A sub sandwich uncut is a taco, and a slice of pie is a taco on its side. Nice, huh? This is all starting to make a lot of sense now, right? This is fun. This is good. Sushi. Some popular examples of sushi are falafel wrap, pigs in blanket, and enchiladas. So those are certainly out of the pale, but we'll call them sushi. Quiche. Some examples of quiche: a cheesecake, a soup in a bread bowl, a falafel pita. Those are quiches, including my beloved Chicago-style deep dish pizza. That's a quiche. So that sounds much healthier when you think of it that way, right? Because it's basically the same as a salad and a bread bowl. That's also healthy. So why not a deep dish pizza? Key lime pie, also a quiche. So all quiches. Calzones, some popular examples are that aforementioned burrito, a corn dog, which completely encloses the ingredients in a starch, right? Or a whole pie. That is also a calzone. Other examples, the bonus round: dumplings are a calzone, Pop-Tarts are calzone, and Uncrustables are a calzone if they're unbitten. If they're bitten, then depending on how far down the bite goes, it could shift to something else, right? I mean, let's be real. Some additional rulings, useful. You have salad. If you have zero starches, it's a salad. So a steak is a salad, mashed potatoes are a salad, flan is a salad. So again, it makes it sound so much healthier. Another bonus round for salads: turducken with sausage stuffing. All of that, that's just a salad. We just didn't realize it. Chocolate. And my favorite, of course, is the wet salad called soup. Cakes, well, cake, it's layers, mini starches. So we have lasagna, Big Macs, flapjacks. That's all just a cake, folks. We had no idea. Nachos, you have a starch or starches that are mixed in. You have stuff around the starches. So things like poutine or Lucky Charms or salad with croutons. We go from being a salad in this case with the croutons to just nachos. This is just nachos. Bonus rounds. Again, another bonus round for salads. We have all kinds of salads here. Muffins or other blocks of starch are type 1 toast when they're not changed. They're just raw and sliced form. And of course, rice, you can interpret it the way you might wish. A vanilla soy latte, just in case anyone was interested, is a 3-bean wet salad. So more salad. We had no idea how healthy we were, right? Humans, and by the way, this is a little aside, humans are just ravioli, or maybe we're just Pop-Tarts. I don't know, but it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. I'm kidding. That's the end of the cube roll. Now we understand where we're going with this whole domain, which is, again, super useful. So is there anything after this that I need to cover before? Yeah, let's just dive in. So that's very important. We see the dog. So let's dive in. All right, let's go now, and we'll take a quick look at the structure behind the cloud deployment. And for some reason, that's over there. No, let's see. Literally, that is not coming over. So I'm going to just peel that and bring that over here. There we go. We'll get there eventually. Okay. So this is Azure Spring Apps. There are other options that are available to you, and the whole idea of making that developer-first cloud has been visited before. I wish I could see you because it's so tough when you're not in person to just say, okay, who here has done this? Who here uses this? But I'm going to ask the question anyway. Who here used at some point one of the more developer-focused clouds like Heroku or Cloud Foundry in any of its various iterations? Again, those of you who know me know that I worked for Pivotal Cloud Foundry, and then just Cloud Foundry in general, which was used throughout the industry. Still has adherents out there, but it's just kind of OBK, right? Overcome by Kubernetes. But the developer-friendly clouds, developer-first clouds, were meant to optimize around our workflows, our developer workflows. Because when are we doing the most and having the biggest impact for our organizations? It's when we're developing that and delivering that much needed functionality to our end users, the customers, the community, those stakeholders who are demanding that functionality, who need it to accomplish their mission, right? And as developers, we have a mission, and that's to make everyone who uses our software successful so they can accomplish their mission. We're part of that. We're a key part of that. And of course, in order for anybody else to be successful, we have to be involved and be wildly successful ourselves. And we write hopefully great software. But until we deploy that, until it gets into the hands of the people who need to use it, until they can do what they need to do with it, it's almost an academic exercise. So it's important we make that last mile, that last kilometer, to where we get that functionality into their hands and keep it there. Scale it when it needs to be scaled. Make it always available, always responsive, resilient. So when failures inevitably happen in the great global infrastructure, that it just heals and goes on, and their service isn't interrupted, their ability to get their job done is not interrupted. And again, this is very critical stuff that we need to do. And with the developer first cloud, we can make sure that happens. We can continue to crank out much needed functionality, fix things when they're not optimally deployed or optimally performant or optimally created, right? That functionality does 99% of what we need, but we really need that last 1%. And if we don't have time to work on that because we're fiddling with some kind of a setting in the cloud, it makes it that much harder to accomplish our mission and to let them accomplish their mission. So several years ago, Pivotal, and back when it was Pivotal, and Microsoft got together and said, look, let's optimize around this and create Azure Spring Apps. And let's support this end to end. So you have a Microsoft team, a VMware team now, it was Pivotal team, the Spring team, who came together to make sure that this worked, integrated well, and was supported. And there are various different levels of support, from the, hey, in different tiers of capabilities, from, hey, deploy everything yourself and it scales down, scales to zero, it's used, your build as you're used, all the way up to, this is enterprise support and we support soup to nuts. And you've got, if you have a problem with the JDK or the deployment, the crafting of the container around your application, the image, or something with the cloud platform, or something in Spring Boot or a Spring library, it's all covered. We will take care of that with a one-team approach, and we've got your back. So this is something that has been a long time coming, but it's been out there a while, and I think people just aren't aware that this developer-first cloud is out there and ready to go for us as developers, and it's just ideal for us as Spring developers. So I'll give you the quick tour to a point, and then we're going to go back and look at the code. I'm going to make some code changes, deploy those code changes, and we'll see how easy that is too, because that's really, again, what matters to us as developers. We can keep our minds focused on releasing better code faster, and be generally happier with our job, and the folks using our software are happier with theirs. So this is the overview page. Again, not anything terribly exciting here. It just shows kind of where I have things running. I'm going to highlight things very quickly here. This is the important screen right here, which is our applications. These are the apps that are deployed to my Azure Spring Apps instance. And again, nothing about this. I kind of took a middle of the road approach. So I'm not using like the premium quality tier. I'm not using the lowest tier. I just kind of want to show you some of the things that are possible. Can you deploy all of these things on your own, in your own cloud deployment? Absolutely. But as developers, we always daily make choices on what makes the best use of our time. And this does so much for so little effort and cost, that it's just, as a developer, I mean, this is one of the reasons I came to Microsoft to continue working on Azure Spring Apps with the Spring team in Microsoft. And it's just a wonderful thing. So again, this is following the cube rule, right? So we have our starch service, which will serve up a starch of various different, numbers, right? If it's one starch, if it's two starches, etc. Then we have a topping service that will serve up, a specified or a random number of starches or toppings to place in or on our starches. We have a food service that actually combines that. So it says, hey, give me a food. It'll grab a starch, it'll grab some number of toppings, and then we decide what it is, right? And then we have a gateway, because anytime you deploy, and of course I'm showing this and I have literally one running instance of each one of these. So this is pretty manageable, right? This is 4 instances, one instance each of 4 different services. It's pretty manageable at this point. But if you had 10 instances of each one, if you scale to 100 instances of each one, then it gets a lot less manageable. So you need things within your, again, that developer-friendly cloud, developer-first cloud, to help manage some of that for you. But I've kept things, again, very simple today. But even with that, if you have 10 instances of each, that's 40 instances in this case, are you going to want to expose every one of those to the outside world? Are you going to want to open up ports and access to URLs externally? No, because by doing that, one, it's unnecessary. Your food service is always going to call your starch or your topping service only. Nobody else is going to be calling that topping service from outside. At least there's no use case for that, no requirement defined for that, and none foreseen. So you don't want to expose that and increase your risk profile, but you do want to have things like the ability to rate limit or the ability to control access via security, logins and permissions and things like that. And that's where a gateway service or something similar comes into being, because you can define the routes, you can define the rates you're allowing, and define the security requirements necessary, the authorization necessary to access these different services. So we route everything to the gateway service. If you look at something like the food service, you can see that it has a test endpoint. So we can test it internally, right? But it doesn't have a URL that's accessible from the outside world, whereas something like the gateway service does. And I'm going to take a quick drink while this loads. There we go. Get my tongue a little less thick here. So we have an external URL that we can use, and we will be using as we go along. I'm going to go ahead and pop that open in another window. That's normal because I don't have anything defined at the root, but we'll come back to that, and I'll show you some of the things that it can do by accessing other services. But this is our starting point. So let's go back here. And I want to show you some of those key infrastructure bits, right? Because no app is an island. I like to say that within various different contexts. But an application typically relies on other applications or external APIs to get its job done, unless you have a monolith. And even the monoliths typically have some external connections, right? So you want to be able to externalize your configuration. Why is that important? Because if you need to make changes and you need to roll them out to all the instances of a particular service, for instance, you need to be able to reload those dynamically. And this is a way that you can do this. This leans heavily on the Spring Cloud config server. And of course, config server can reference things like Kubernetes properties. It can reference GitHub repos. I'm pointing this at a GitHub repository right now. And you can define things like what search path you want to go to. So if I go here and just grab this and I go and pull that up, we can see this in this repository that there is a configure. So I've got my configuration properties set here. I've, again, kept it very simple for the purposes of the demo, but everything can load up in here. You can have things broken out for each different service with service-specific properties. Yeah, so this is just going to bother me now. I'm going to go ahead and plug this in where I can pull up some things from our gateway. We'll go to food and we'll go to a random food. So that way it gets rid of the ugly screen here. Again, I can set a liveness check. I just haven't done that because the purpose of the gateway is to be a gateway, right? To point to everything else. And that's what we'll be doing as we go along. So with the config service, what it does is loads up properties and supplies them to any service that requests them, right? So every one of our Spring Boot applications has the config client dependency, and that is sufficient because it will retrieve these properties that are loaded up and provided by the built-in config server within our, in this case, within our Azure Spring Apps instance. Let's see, some of the other things we want to do. Oh, one thing that I can't really show you under this particular level of service, but the service directory, and I'll show you kind of how this works effectively from the applications, it's all baked in as well. So everything, when we create a new instance or a new application, what it will do when we fire up the first instance or various instances, they will go and check the service registry. They'll register their location, how their coordinates, so they can be found, they can be located by other services that need to contact them. And I'll show you the effective upshot of that and how simple that makes our lives as developers momentarily. I do want to show you this, a couple of things here, because the pricing tier, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, so I'll stop with this and we'll go to the code. But as you can see, I'm kind of right in the middle on the pricing, well, sort of in the middle on the pricing tier. You go all the way down to standard consumption, which means you only pay for what you use. If you use almost none, you pay almost nothing. If you go all the way up to enterprise support, there's really no reason. If you see the difference in the cost, this is per month for a standard estimated price per month for an instance. And of course, you can get full support from the the VMware and Microsoft Teams, again, from idea to deployment and then some. And it gives you quite a bit of capabilities. But again, you have the ability to go down to almost nothing, which is crazy on how much you get for for how little. It's just insane. So I kind of split the difference here, and I'm in the middle to show you some things and not focus on the others that are kind of boring anyway. So let's go back to our apps, and with that, let's go over here to our applications. Here is our gateway service, and I've defined just a pretty simple route here that cover routes. So we have our starch route, which takes things that come in on a load balancer. And we're using load balancing to apply this so that if we have 1 or 10 or 100 different instances of the starch service, for instance, it's load balanced across those as it makes sense to do so. The predicates, it will look for anything from our gateway that says /starch /whatever. It'll strip that prefix, the starch, out, and it'll pass that on to the downstream starch service instances. Same thing with topping. We do the same thing here and with food. Again, very consistent. And the only thing we really had to do to our application, other than defining a route, and you can do this all in code, but I find this much more elegant to do it this way, is just to make sure that this is a discovery client. We've enabled this as a discovery client, so it can find in the service registry where all the other applications are. And that's why you can define this like this, because it identifies it as it's identified, as each different service identifies itself to the service registry. And that way we don't have to mess with IP addresses, which change, which should be, very dynamic. We use that service registry and lean on that to make sure we get where we need to go. For instance, let's see, this is our topping service, which is good. We want to come back to that. Is this, no, this is not the one that I wanted to do. So I will come back to that momentarily. So here is our starch service. And the starch service, let's see, anything particularly of interest? We have a starch defined as description and the number of sides. We have a controller. I used an init method to create a bunch of different starches, everything from a potato, which has one side when it's uncut, a baked potato, which has an open face. That's more like 3 sides, right? French fries, 0 sides, so we can make that into a salad, or nachos, I guess, as poutine would be, right? Am I remembering that right? You have 1 and 2 piece buns. So a 1 piece bun has 3 sides. That's the taco, 2 sides, etc., all the way down to cakes. This is just a really good start. And then we have some basic functionality here we've defined in our starch service. Let's see here. So this is our food service. This is what I was wanting to show you. This I defined for the local stuff, but we can just get rid of that. If you notice, we're calling this, and this doesn't look like a valid URL, but this leverages our service registry to find an instance, an available instance of our starch service. So our food service will say, just give me a starch service instance. And I'm going to hit that and send a request to it, and I'll get back the response, and life goes on. And if you have 10 starch services running in the cloud and 9 die, and that one is running, guess what? It'll go to that. And then meanwhile, your cloud platform is spinning up 9 additional ones to fill in, to backfill. And then it's seamless. It's just transparent to the end user. It's transparent to us as developers. We just see what's happening in the logs, so to speak. So it all works exceedingly well. Now I need to go and open this. Let's see, I'm in the ASA sandwich. So if I go to toppings, CD toppings service, and I want to open this. And of course, it opens it on another window. That's weird. That was interesting. Okay, so that gets us fascinating. Okay, so there's our food controller. There's a gateway service. Yeah, I love it when it's loading things and you try to use your key combinations and you actually wind up moving the wrong windows. That's all good. Okay, so let's go first to our POM. I always like to check my POM to make sure it has everything I need. And of course, in this case, we know it doesn't, because the one thing that I want to do, everything is running now, but I want to add some interesting spice to it because it is food, right? So I'm going to add a dependency, and I'm going to add my Spring Boot starter data MongoDB. Yes, that's exactly what I want. Because what I want to do is integrate with a backend service. And we have Cosmos DB, which implements all kinds of different APIs like MongoDB and Postgres and things like that. So I'm going to be using that. I'm going to go ahead and refresh my dependencies, and then we'll get started with our application code. If I go to my application properties, application YAML, and I'm going to run this locally first, except I should probably docker start my Mongo. And this, I use this as an example to kind of showcase, even though it's kind of off the beaten path, it's so easy and quick to do, to showcase how easy it is to use a full-on planetary scale database like Cosmos DB with basically no effort on your part. If you're developing in Mongo locally and you can switch to something like that, it makes it really nice when you're deploying globally to the cloud. So that's kind of nice as well. So let's go to our application class. Let's go back and see what we have here. We've got a pretty good selection here. We have an enum called taste, sweet, savory, or both. So we can define whether a topping makes sense within a particular context. Things like, well, I'll show you in a moment here. So you have a topping which incorporates an idea, description, and taste. The controller is where I actually use, again, and similar in that init method. So things like, and things that you might not expect. So peanut butter can be both. I mean, you can see peanut butter used in sweet or savory dishes. Chocolate can be both, like mole. In certain Latin American dishes, particularly Mexican dishes, you have mole, which is chocolate based. So that's a savory taste, but you can also have chocolate in a very sweet construct, sandwich, if you will. You have chocolate chips, chips are typically used only in sweet contexts. But again, this is a little fluid, right? So we have some toppings defined here, and we can use those in various different contexts. In this case, though, right now, the code that I have is not using a backend database. So we're going to add that capability to do that. I'm going to go to my topping first, and I'm just going to annotate this as document, right? And we're going to store this in MongoDB or a MongoDB capable database. I'm going to add the ID annotation there, and that gets us what we need there. So now if we go to our, well, the other thing I need to do is do a new Java class. This will be an interface. We'll call this our topping repository, right? That's fine. And we will extend our CRUD repository. And once again, if you saw my earlier talk, we have GitHub Copilot, which is helpfully offering that we want to store objects of type topping with ID of type string. And Bob's your uncle, we should be ready to go there. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my controller class. We're going to database enable this. So I'm going to inject here my topping repository, right? And we'll add that as a constructor parameter. So we have constructor injection. And now we can use that. I'm just going to take this, instead of doing a toppings at all, and I'm actually going to, before I forget it, just comment this. So it's going to scream at me now that, hey, you don't have this toppings to do anything with. So we'll save all, and that gets us most of the way there. Now, as I mentioned in my earlier talk, a good practice if you're going to define some sample data is to delete everything that's in there first before you save it. Otherwise, if you run this multiple times, you can wind up with duplicate records, and nobody needs that. And then, of course, what I like to do, just as a kind of a nice thing, is do a find all for each, and nope, something helped me a little too much there. For each, there we go. And now we can see those new toppings as they're created and added to the database. We can verify that they're there, I should say. So at this point, how are we doing on time? Great so far. We need to get all toppings. That's simply done with just a repo.find all. And then this is a little trickier, right? We want to get a topping by a particular ID, but I'm just going to get rid of these things here and do a repo.find by ID or else. Because if it doesn't find something by ID, it really should just return this, right? This new topping. Or else, if we look at this, you can see that it returns a topping, well, in this case, a topping. So if we don't find one, we provide our own, which is just kind of a placeholder so we can see what happened. Here we want to generate if we don't provide a count, a specific count of toppings to return, we want to generate some kind of a random number. I'm creating that next int, so I'll do a repo.count, and that gets us most of the way there. That returns a long. We know there are not going to be that many, so I'm just going to make this still an integer, 2int exact, and there we go. And then here, I'm creating an array list of toppings. Now, Pardon me. What I want to do with that is just take this, take our repo.find all. Let's start with that, right? That's not quite right. What I would need to do once I return this is, in this case, it's an iterable. So I need to do a little bit of massaging on this. So streamable dot of, sure, let's try that. And then we have a streamable of this, and we'll convert that to a list. And the rest I think we can leave pretty much as is. Next up, by the way, my next stop will be at some point to make sure we can select sweet, savory, or both. In this case, it's all just kind of random, which is fun. Maybe not as productive when we go to production, but certainly more fun. So that should work. Let's try that and see what we come up with. Gives me a chance to take a quick drink. And of course, it's going to tell me, hey, there's no config server and there's no service registry because we're running this locally and I didn't spin up an instance of that. That's all to be expected. But the key bits that I want to see is, did it create those records and did it save them? And of course, now I'm seeing all this this stuff that I don't necessarily care about. I saw them scroll by, but it's going to take, there we go. I was going to say it's going to take too long to find them, but they're there. They're there. But if we want to test this, if we really want to see if this worked, here's kind of a nice way to do it. HTTP 8083, wasn't it? We'll see if we get back our topping response. Hello from topping, that's good. And if we do a toppings, we should get back our full list of toppings. That worked. And then let's grab our, let's do our custard. Let's do marshmallows. Marshmallows are good. And let's paste that and see if we retrieve that. That's working. And if we want to grab a random number of toppings, oops, let's see. Why did that? Oh, there we go. Okay, so yeah, random. I mean, literally can be none. Just so rarely happens that it's kind of weird when you see that. So we're getting back a random number of toppings. Is good. So let's go ahead and stop this and stop this. And I'm going to go ahead and change this, comment this, and I want to build our application. So Maven W clean package -d skip tests just to keep things test. Oops, to keep things tight. So we'll see if that works without the S. Interestingly, tests. Oh, it's going to run. Yeah, it helps when you do computers. So literal. Yeah. So I have some tests in there that I need to go clean up. But there we go. So we should be good. The next thing I want to do, though, now is to do a deploy. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy this. We have our topping service. We're pointing that at our Spring Azure Spring App service. We're passing it the artifact path, which gets us our jar file. And then we'll just fire that off and we'll go back and, I do want to show the logs here as I go. So logs. So we'll tail those logs. We'll see what happens as it happens, which not much happens initially. So we'll pop over here and take a look at, a few things happen, I guess. But we want to go here, as it says it'll take a while to occur. If I refresh this screen, we see that this is updating. So that's exactly what should happen, right? But this is developer focus. So let's go into the developer focus part and see what else we can see here. Let's see, what did not I cover? So we have alerts we can set. As a developer, we don't want to spend a lot of time in our cloud platform. We want to make sure everything's working. We want to resolve anything that might crop up that we're not expecting, and we want to get back to our code. But so you can define alerts, and it will let you know when things are out of that happy path. You can define metrics. So you can set up your own screen, your own custom screen, so you can quickly check the key points that are important for you, for us to see, so that we can quickly identify if everything looks good and get back to business. Again, I liken this to aviation. You do this instrument scan and you don't spend a lot of time on any particular instrument. You just get that overall picture and you get back to the business of flying, right? Same thing with software development. You check your instruments and you make sure everything is working properly and everything's happy in terms of your distributed system, and you get back to the business of coding. You can set up different diagnostic settings. I won't be getting into that right now. You can examine logs. This is kind of a nice thing to show since I have a couple of minutes. You can, for instance, show the application logs which contain error or exception. Well, I don't make errors. You don't either. So this is kind of a useless query, right? I mean, if we run this, it's not going to show anything. Oh, thank goodness it didn't show anything. I'm just kidding. In our case, there truly isn't anything bad going on at this point in time, which is good. But this is using the Custo queries, and it's super easy, right? And it prompts you as you go. So when you need to get to the bottom of something, you don't have to learn yet another specific language. You just follow the prompts here. So if I want to get the app name contains, and let's say we want to just get the uh, topping logs, topping service logs. So I just say, hey, if the app name contains topping, give me what you got. So that looks pretty good, right? And we're deploying. So this is, you're seeing a lot of activity here. If we want to look at, for instance, the food service, run that, everything just works, right? So if we go back here, we see that it's deployed. We see that we popped out because everything stopped. We'll go ahead and tail this as we go, and then we'll go and we'll exercise these endpoints. So this is where it gets kind of fun, right? So if we go back to our apps, yeah, we can exit our query. That's fine. Actually, I have my gateway up over here already. So if I go to, for instance, Starch, well, Starch is fine. Hello from Starch. I just like to throw a liveness check in there for each of my in my backing services. That's fine. And then if I want to do starches, I think. No, I don't have that defined. So let's see. Starch random. Let's grab a random starch. So here's what we'll get if we're exercising that starch endpoint. If we go again, toppings, toppings. There we go. That's the difference right there. Because it strips out that prefix from the gateway, and then we are hitting everything from the gateway by design. And if we go to food, right? Food, again, that's kind of the liveness check. I got a little creative with that. And if I want to get a random food, now we see that we're getting a single layer of pasta, and we're adding things to it like chutney, chocolate, sour cream, mashed potatoes, lettuce, chocolate chips. Boy, this, I don't know, maybe not the tastiest, but we're getting this random number. If I go back here and look at my logs, we return 27 toppings. Let's go ahead and exercise that a few more times and see what we get. And we see that we're returning a varying number of toppings as we go. So this is exactly what it's supposed to do. You can access everything from the command line, which is usually what I do. But in many cases, it's like a map in Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever. It's nice to see that context. It's nice to see that overview, which brings me to the next part, right? Because when you need to get to the bottom of something fast, it's really great to have some application insights. And of course, you can use third-party applications to tie into this, but application insights kind of gets you really far down the road really easily and quickly. So if I look at this, we have an application dashboard here. This is kind of the high points that I like to watch. You can also go into things like performance and see a lot more. I'm actually going to come back to this in a moment because what I like to do is start with the application map. And this is a really nice quick overview for us as devs to see because it shows you everything. And of course, I only have the single backing service that I created and added to my topping service, which is a Cosmos DB implementation of the Mongo API. But if you have various different backing services, various different middleware services, things like event hubs or pipelines of any kind, those all show up here so you can get an idea of your performance implications. And if something isn't looking like it should, perhaps, or maybe isn't optimized the way you'd want it to be. So if I click on this example, the interactions between the topping service and our Cosmos DB database, we can investigate the performance. And if you notice, this looks pretty familiar, right? This is our performance tab right back again. You can go under operations and check the different operations that are called from our application here, the dependencies, the roles, and you can drill in various different ways to get more information. For instance, if we look at, let's say we do a get toppings, the top 3 dependencies we can look at, there's MongoDB showing. We can drill into a sample. In this case, we can check out the end-to-end transaction details. This is super powerful, and this is not something you're going to spend a lot of time in as a developer. But again, when things are, you're getting that notification that something is not quite right. It's super developer focused to get in, find the issue, resolve the issue, and get out and get back to what you love and do best, and the way that you deliver the most value for your org, and that's your development work, right? So this gives you that insight that you need very quickly, and you can drill in and see what's going on and how that you might want to address it. You can see the actual command that's running to operate, to perform this operation that it's doing at that point in time. So let's go back here. That's kind of the quick overview, and come back to our service. Is there anything else that I wanted to show? That's pretty much it, I believe. And that's kind of the very quick tour. Again, all of these things are things that you can deploy and create and deploy by hand yourself, but it's such an inordinate burden, as we've all seen when running Kubernetes or even anything else, to manage all of those things, that it takes so much time away from you being able to deliver that exceptional business value to your organization. And it's the effort and the costs are so minimal that it just makes sense to leverage that whenever you can, so you can get back to doing the things that do the most for you and your org. So let's go back and wrap up here. I'm doing pretty well on time, I think. So helpful resources. Yeah, I call this ASA sandwich, so Azure Spring Apps sandwich. I hope everybody's not too hungry after that. But this is certainly one of those world-changing events, defining what a sandwich is and defining what different foods are. And I think it definitely needed to be handled. If you want to check that out, the code is all out there, including the scripts to deploy. And again, I will be adding and editing and changing these as I go along. So please do star and watch so you get notified of those changes. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, now's the time. Once we lose our chance to chat now live, please do continue to reach out to me via email or on Twitter /X/ whatever we're calling it next week. Again, MKHeck is the best place to reach me. But please just do reach out to me, because I love to chat about this stuff and find better ways to solve the same problems or better problems. With that, we're in Q&A.
Thank you very much. That was indeed another great presentation, and also pretty inspiring in the way that, I mean, within this short time frame, showing the whole process pretty much end to end, and also showing some of the parts of the DevOps work, right? There are many developers that are just throwing the code after over a fence and then letting somebody else go and drill into the logs. And yeah, it's not that scary to look inside. So the first question that I will have, probably I will not have many because of the time, but still. So you showed the deployment process, obviously the development process, also the application maps, and looking at some of the aspects of log filtering and diagnostics, right? And I do also agree that this is probably the minimal set of DevOps skills that a developer will need to work productively in their environment. What would be the next step, right? So let's say somebody is really getting in, feeling that they want to learn more and to be even more productive. What would be the next aspects? Let's say the developer that just getting into touching the cloud themselves and getting their hands dirty with the cloud. What would be the next services that you would recommend to look at to become a productive, better, experienced?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you brought this up, because as with all my talks and with any talks from anyone anywhere, you have a certain limited amount of time. So I always try to hone in on the fundamentals, or at least the key elements. But once you establish those key elements, those kind of key foundational skills, then I typically kind of look at expanding outward. So I always kind of focus on the center nugget and then build out. So what I would look at next after this is, once you develop a certain appreciation and understanding of what it takes to deploy that software by hand, which is kind of what I did there, right? I did an AZCLI command, or a couple or three, that went ahead and, well, actually, it's just the one. I did a Maven build, a clean package, and then I did the deploy. But pipelines, so your CI/CD pipelines, and of course, probably the favorite example of many folks is GitHub Actions, which I love. But there are other options as well. And once you establish that you can successfully and repeatably deploy things the same way, it's sort of like coding, right? Once you kind of get into the routine, and I say that in a good way, right? Being able to do things efficiently and effectively the same way, and get the job done well, consistently, you start looking at ways to automate that. And the same thing with your pipelines, right? Once you can deploy things consistently and it's successful in the deployment, then you can look at automating that. GitHub Actions is, as I mentioned, kind of my favorite, my pet example, but and many others as well. But that's kind of the next step there. Now, on the back end of that, in terms of the management, there are a couple things I would point to. One is the scaling, because as I mentioned, I show examples where I have one instance of each service. That's in many cases that's not realistic. In fact, if we're wanting this to this application, whatever application, we'll call it seafood in this case, to take off and be big globally, you want to have certain auto scaling rules in place. And one thing that ASA does for you is allow you to set up nested scaling rules. So you can have rules that apply like, okay, we know from Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. I'll just give a terrible example. US time, it's going to hit this surge. And maybe, when Europe comes online 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. or different parts of Asia comes online. So you can define these, and where they overlap, it will make sense of those rules. You also can define those, and let's say we just went with the one. We're rolling out to the U.S. first in this case because that's where I'm located, and I'm starting with that and building out. So I'm going to do that 8 to 5. But we also know that Black Friday is coming up, and Black Friday is the shopping day of the year where all the businesses go into the black. They come out of the red in terms of their balance sheet. So we know it's going to be huge. So we want something that's specifically geared toward ramping up for Black Friday and Black Friday weekend, if you will, right after our holiday, Thanksgiving holiday. And we don't want those to conflict with the rules that are the auto scaling for Monday through Fridays, 8 to 5. And all of those things work together and I don't want to say scale together, but they succeed each other in a logical manner. So that's the next step, is set it up to where it scales out and scales in automatically, so you're not having to hand tune or fix things when it doesn't scale to meet demand. And it doesn't scale back and waste money, right? That's the other side of that. The other thing is, of course, the monitoring. And we have a lot of great monitoring partners. I don't want to mention any of them because I'll leave out, one or two or five or whatever, and I don't want to give anybody short shrift. I showed our stuff because it's easy, and I don't show favoritism necessarily. But there are a lot of great partners who help analyze and show that data in a consumable fashion that, again, as a developer, we want to just be able to check the dashboard. We want to check the instruments and make sure everything's okay and get back to our business at hand. Or if something's wrong, we need to quickly isolate those issues. And of course, you can go crazy with these things, and not in a bad way, crazy with these things, and make it very easy to isolate and resolve issues very quickly. So those are the areas that may be more than you asked for, but those are the areas I would focus on next. And depending on your demands or your interests, you might focus on one or more of those first. I probably, as long as everything was running okay and you could leverage the stuff that's obviously the scaling would probably come next. But once you had some basic scaling, auto scaling rules in place, then I would move into that CI/CD pipeline and automate as much as I could, and then go back and revisit on how to expand the monitoring. But that's kind of the order I would follow. Doesn't necessarily follow what your demands or your needs might be.
So it basically, when you were explaining I was seeing it as, like, say, a top layer of well-architected framework coverage, right? So you start with an operational excellence. You have the monitoring, you have the deployment, you go to the cost optimization and the scalability aspect of things, right? The only bit probably is security, that is seen by many developers a little bit more obscure topic, but everything else is pretty much the well-architected framework, depending on how deep probably the individual person wants to dive and how much this topic triggers the interest of a specific person, right? So yeah, that's a very good advice, and I'm pretty sure that you have inspired lots of developers there to stop just looking into the code and committing to whatever GitHub, and then somebody else takes care of how it runs in the production, but to actually look inside of the cloud, because by many, I know actually that for many this sheer number of the services and sheer number of possibilities is intimidating a little bit. But yes, the demos were amazing. So thank you very much. And that were very inspiring. And those presentations that I'm pretty sure will make many people better developers.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just happy to be here, happy to be a part of this. And thanks for inviting me. And and look forward to seeing everybody, I guess, on Twitter/X. And if anybody has any questions, comments, or feedback, and they want to continue the conversation, just reach out to me. I'm here.
Thank you very much, and hope to see you on the upcoming conferences. Hopefully, one of them going to be in real life. Thank you.
Yes, looking very much forward to that as well. Virtual is awesome in different ways, so we need them all.
Absolutely.